Hi there, City Church. It's great to be able to speak to you again. I hope you're doing really well and you've had a good week. I want to start today by proposing to you an action, something that I'd like you to do. You may be sitting there brimming with energy in your spiritual life today, or you may be feeling far away from God, lethargic or apathetic or grumpy, or you may be joy-filled, optimistic and bright-eyed. But I wonder, will you join me in giving something a go today? I can hear yeses in living rooms across the city. So here it is. I want you to be more hopeful this week. Hope is an interesting word, isn't it? It can be either a noun, something we have, or it can be a verb, something we do. Christian hope is also a possession and it's an action. And I want to encourage you to take some steps and some concrete actions this week which speak and flow through hope. Let's face it, things are a little bit depressing at the moment, aren't they? You know, with the headlines on COVID and then the headlines on COVID and then the headlines on, oh, well, there's a bit of Brexit to give a bit of light relief, but then back to COVID. You know, things have been a little bit depressing. And things were quite depressing in Rome in around the year AD 60 with Nero using Christians as torches for his garden parties. And the Apostle Paul wrote this around that time to the church in Rome in chapter 16 of the book of Romans. He said, "May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace in believing, so that by the power of the Holy Spirit you may abound in hope." I'll read that again. "May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace in believing, so that by the power of the Holy Spirit you may abound in hope." The world has always had its fair share of darkness, of depression, of worrying headlines and threatening futures. But into this darkness has burst a glorious light. The God of hope has appeared, giving to those who take the simple step of believing in him the gift of joy, the gift of peace. And the God who is one but three has also given us his Spirit, not a weak or meagre force, but described here as a power. And that same Spirit lives in us, produces not just a fleeting hope, but Paul says an abundance of hope. This week then, let's verbify hope. Let's live it out. Let's put feet to it. Let's be the most hopeful person in the room. Let's not speak word of darkness or despair, but let's speak word of hope, of the future. Let's speak words which point forward to Jesus. And in order to fuel this hope for you, I want to remind you of 4 bits of our story as Christians. 4 bits of the Christian story which speak profoundly of the reason why hope is the right choice for us. And the first bit of the story I want to remind you of is creation. To every devastating headline, every depressing article, every worrying trend, or every anxiety-making media story, creation says, yes, but this is God's good world. Every blade of grass has been shaped by him. The sunset is his evening canvas. The rolling hills are his playful sculptures. If the world had ceased to have any purpose, any future, he would have dispensed with it, but he renews it every morning, season by season, we live on God's good earth, under God's good heaven. And we hope towards the joining of those two one day. The second bit of the story that would remind us and fuel our hope is that of covenant. To every promise broken, every dishonest voice, every let down person, and every disappointed human, God's covenant says yes, but God's promises are truer. His voice is trustworthy. His actions have never proved false. He is who he says he is. The third piece of the story is the cross. To every accusation, every shaming, every tit-for-tat interaction where one human takes a chunk out of another in the global game of one-upmanship, the cross says yes, but Christ has absorbed it. Christ has taken on the pain. Christ has borne in his own body on the tree the inhumanity of human to human. And the fourth bit of our story is the resurrection. To every despairing voice, every pessimistic proclamation of doom, every prediction of ruin and disaster, the resurrection says yes, but what can be worse than death? Nothing. What can be more final? Nothing. What could be more cut and dry? Nothing. Oh yeah? Christ has died. Christ is risen. Christ will come again. Christ has died. Christ is now risen. And Christ will come again. I pray that this reminder of our story will spur you on to acts of hope this week. I pray that this reminder of who we are as the people of God, from creation through covenant, through the cross, to the resurrection of Jesus, and then the resurrection of all things, will spur you on to be a hopeful people this week, to inject hope into situations of despair, to speak hope where people are only pessimistic, to speak the hope of Christ into a broken world. It's probably the best evangelism you could do this week, to be a hopeful person. It's probably the best intercession you could do this week. It's probably the best pastoral work that you could do this week. It's probably the best act of service and justice you could do this week, is to bring hope into the places that you go. So may you be spurred on to be a hopeful people, and may we as a church find in Christ that abundance of hope by the power of the Spirit that is every believer's. And as we close, I want to just talk about something else very briefly and fill you in on something. As we think about that hope, and then we think about other situations in which that hope is not present, you may remember some months ago, around the time of the appalling murder of George Floyd in America, and the mass protests against racism that went on and still are continuing, we sent around a book recommendation by a pastor in London called Ben Lindsay, and the book was called We Need to Talk About Racism. Well, I just wanted to update you and fill you in that since then we have, probably in a fairly stumbling way, been trying to talk about racism as leaders, and particularly in conversation with some of the black and minority ethnic members of York City Church, both present and past members. And we're going to continue those conversations this coming term. We're going to continue to challenge ourselves to see a church built in York of many nations and backgrounds, which includes all and which stands against racism in its obvious and in its non-obvious forms. And I'm really grateful to Tara Gillian for highlighting some really provocative resources and articles for us as we have these conversations. And I'm going to be sending out an email straight after the email you've received with this video with some of these resources linked to and some super helpful summaries Tara has put together of each piece. The articles are thought-provoking, they're feisty, you may not agree with every single word that they have in, but please have a read, please be challenged, and please keep praying that God would build his multicoloured church in the city of York. So things to be hopeful about today. May you have a hope-filled week, and may Jesus be with you, and may you know the Holy Spirit dwelling within you and giving you joy and peace. God bless you, York City Church.